Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Welcome to Homelessness, and Insanity in the Age of Corona, which is our last session for day 2 of City Scripts. Home is a romantic concept, but it's also fraught. It's a fraught concept. The pandemic revealed the extreme disparities in the way people around the world relate to the idea of home. For some, it became a cocoon, pregnant with new Instagrammable possibilities. For others, the reality of home as a site of violence acquired a deadly new intensity. And for others who ended up dead on the roads and railway tracks, home was a mirage they would never grasp. Now, this is a session which we've been looking forward to a lot, and we think it's a much needed discussion on mental health, especially what is thrown out during the pandemic. So I'd like to start by introducing our wonderful panel. We have Maji Hailemariam is an assistant professor with the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology and Reproductive Biology in the College of Human Medicine. Her research focuses on mental health of the underserved population. Maji also holds a PhD in mental health epidemiology from the Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia. Welcome, Maji. I hope I got the pronunciation right. We're also joined by Abhisek Anicca, who is a writer, poet, and researcher and disability rights activist. He identifies as a person with disability and chronic illness. He's currently a research scholar at Ambedkar University in New Delhi, where he's working on disability and masculinity. Welcome, Abhisek. We also have Irene Caselli, who's been a multimedia reporter for 15 years between Europe and Latin America. She was a BBC correspondent in Venezuela when Hugo Chavez died, and her work has appeared in the Washington Post and The Guardian, among others. She reports on the crucial period in which our brains are built and how it shapes our future. Welcome, Irene. Next up, we have Smriti Joshi, who's the first certified mental health professional in Asia and a clinical psychologist. She works as the lead psychologist for WASA, the world's first mental health chatbot, and has contributed to designing therapeutic intervention programs, as well as mentoring a remote team of therapists offering text-based therapeutic support via the program. She's striving hard to popularize telemental health as a means of service delivery to research the remotest corners of the country. Our moderator for this evening is Tanmoy Goswami, who's the founder of Sanity by Tanmoy, which is a fully reader-funded platform with original reporting and essays on politics, economics, and culture of global mental health. Until recently, he was the world's first Sanity correspondent at The Correspondent, before switching to mental health propelled by his own experience of living with depression, anxiety, and self-harm. Tanmoy was an associate editor of the Economic Times Prime and the head of the desk at Fortune India. His book on India's mental health movement is due to be published by Penguin Random House India later in the year. Thank you all for joining us. I hope I got all the intros right and everybody's names right. Sorry for any mistake. And over to you, Tanmoy. We're very glad to have you here.
Thank you. So fantastic. I'm having a bit of a fanboy moment because this is a panel that is exclusively populated by people that I absolutely adore and admire. So thank you all so much. Maji, thank you for making it from Ethiopia, Irene from Greece, Abhisek, Smriti, and myself, of course, from India. This is so amazing. Thank you. I want to jump straight into it. I think we will not get very prolix about the idea behind the panel because the 3 keywords should suffice: home, homelessness, insanity. Those are our keywords, and we will play around with those words, and we will see where we arrive by the end of this discussion, and then we will take a bunch of questions, comments, etc. From the people listening in. And the count is going up of participants as we speak, which is great to see on a Friday evening. I'm going to begin by reading out a passage that has absolutely gripped my imagination for the past several months now, and it is a passage from something that Abhisek wrote. So Abhisek, with your permission, I'm going to read this out. This was published in Mad in Asia. And Abhisek writes in an article which he calls The Anatomy of Lockdown Loneliness. He writes, and I quote, "At the end of 3 months of lockdown, I found myself on my bed, unable to move. My body was functional, but something prevented me from getting out of my bed. There seemed to be enough space, yet I could feel the pressure around me, compressing me, squeezing me into an unknown darkness. I couldn't comprehend what was wrong, and it made me uneasy. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. I hadn't been able to sleep for 2, perhaps 3 nights. I checked my phone to confirm that it was morning outside. It was time to get up. I moved slowly to the side of the bed, but couldn't get down. There was something blocking my way. I rolled on to the other side, but couldn't get down. Was there an invisible wall around me that I couldn't see? Was I dreaming? Um, Abhishek, I want to start with you, and this is a question that I would like to ask all of you. Um, but taking my cues from what Abhishek has written and how he has described this idea of home and that space that he was in. Abhishek, what was that space that you were in? What was the idea of home for you during those uh, bizarre few months?
No, home, with the idea of home comes the idea of comfort, um, primarily. So during the lockdown era, there was a dichotomy within me also. There was this person who was thankful that he was privileged, he was not out on the streets, not walking back to his paternal home in search of a home. But there was also this disabled person who was not able to, or who had to do a lot of daily chores, who had to do a lot of work, and was still expected to be creative, to be productive, quote unquote. And that took a toll on me. And I realized, can we have a home where we don't feel cared for, or where we don't feel protected, where we feel vulnerable all the time? Is that home? Because the idea we have been running behind throughout, we have been told that we should be independent, we should be productive, we should do this and that. And all of those ideas, all of that idea of me, that despite being chronically ill and disabled, that I'm out there and I'm living on my own and doing things on my own, that fell apart completely. And when that falls apart, there is nothing to hold you up, hold you straight, whatever. Hold you straight is a very bad metaphor for me because I have scoliosis. So, but it is also something which was holding me together. And when that fell apart, I really couldn't. I started crying in the middle of the afternoon. I didn't know what was happening because there was nothing to hold on to. And then, so the home, which I had brought new plans for home, I was trying to, build a space around myself. And yet none of that mattered. There was an echo outside of my house of people being forced to leave because they couldn't sustain in the city. And inside, I was crumbling because I felt extremely lonely. I felt worthless because that's how the study projects your productivity and your thing. And then and despite all that, I was trying to be creative, trying to write something, write poetry, be on Instagram, post a lot. It None of that helped because I was so vulnerable inside. And so there were days, and with that there were so many chores to do. There were utensils to wash, there was food to cook, there was a house to wash. Um so you woke up in the morning and thought, well, I have to do that, and what for? What is the cost of calling this a home? And is it really a home if I have to go all out and fall apart just to basically hold on to this idea of home? So that was the thing that started with, and the whole process of thinking about home. And I felt isolated, alienated. I felt there was no home for me, and that's the truth. Even though I went back to my parents after a few months because I couldn't, I had very bad mental health. I realized that. I told my mother one day that I don't think I can live here. But the thing is, is there any home for me then? If I am not able-bodied, if I'm not able to care for myself, if I'm not able to do everything on my own, and despite having good people who help me in uh, sometime, it became very difficult. And then there was the other world which was talking about sensory deprivation or not being able to go out. And I was like, oh, dude, I don't care. I can count years since I last had any kind of sexual pleasure, because of my disabled body. So I can tell you that that's not a big deal for me. But big deal for me, what is the world for you is not the world for me. So, and it's seldom that you look at it from my perspective. The entire idea of body, body as a home. What happens when your body turns hostile? Does it remain a home? Because I have chronic UTI. So every day I would wake up and I would have this fear that I have a UTI infection, urinary tract infection again. And I couldn't go for testing because it was a lockdown thing. I was panicking because just 2 years ago I was in a hospital. A year before that I was in a hospital because my UTI infection has increased so much that it damaged my kidneys. So all of that, of course, build things up to such a level that I had no answers really. And it actually took me time to get away and give myself few months to, you know, uh, to realize what was happening to me.
Thank you, Abhishek. I think that image that you left us with, body as home, and what happens when your body turns hostile, is just so powerful. And some of the themes that you touched upon, especially bordering on your, drawn from your experience of living with a disability. During my work at the Correspondent, when it still existed, I wrote a series of articles on touch, and I was that was the time when I first realized that the whole world was going, uh, I'm going to use incorrect language, nuts, because we were suffering from touch deprivation, and then there were all of these people for whom this was not a new thing at all. They'd lived with touch deprivation for decades, and they were trying to talk to us able-bodied people and tell us, listen, do this, otherwise you're going to really suffer, but we were not listening. And another story that somebody, a person who teaches at a university in Eastern India told me was, and she lives with a disability, and she told me, during the lockdown, everybody was complaining about doing dishes or doing housework, and people were looking at me and saying, you must be getting a good free ride, right? Because you don't have to do any housework. You're sitting on your wheelchair, sitting pretty, doing nothing. And it struck me, how patently obvious that should have been, but it's just something that you never think about if you don't inhabit that kind of body. So thank you so much, Abhishek. I think that's an excellent start. Thank you very much. I want to jump to Maji, because Maji and I, full disclosure, we've been following each other's work. Maji is somebody who's having an increasingly solid impact on the global mental health movement. She got the Lancet to almost sort of rewrite the rules of the global mental health movement by demanding that we listen more to people from low and middle income countries. So Maji is somebody that I once again admire a great deal. And Maji and I were chatting earlier about how she inhabits homes in two completely different worlds, the US, Ethiopia, and I think she recently went back home to Ethiopia. And I think she was tweeting about what should I do? Are there any regulations that I need to follow? I need to take my baby home, and I was just trying to see the whole thing from her perspective. Maji, tell us a little bit about what it felt like to be in that liminal space between two homes.
Thank you, Tanmoy. So I work in two completely different spaces, and I am now at that stage where I sometimes call both places home. The concept home is sometimes elusive because I come here and I miss the home I have in Michigan, and I sit in Michigan and I miss the home here. So I was having a discussion a couple weeks ago with my primary care doctor, who is an Indian American. She's been in the US for 25 years, and she told me she feels like she lives out of her suitcase in all those years, because to her the place where she truly feels at home is in a place where when she goes back to India. So I told her I share that feeling a lot, because like in the US, when I live there, I see in some spaces either my accent or my presence makes people uncomfortable or makes them turn their heads to check out me again, and makes me like they ask me to repeat myself. And I come here and I blend in perfectly, and I don't have to explain my existence to anyone. So I walk on the streets here. I have been in Addis now for 5 days. And when I go out, I am as anonymous as anyone. And my presence in any space is not like turning anyone's head, because I blend in. So I love the comfort that comes with it, the sense of security that comes with it, the love that comes with belonging to a space. And having that means a lot to people. I don't remember his exact name now, but this German philosopher, I can look him up. He said, home is where they understand you. So home for me is somewhere or anywhere where I don't have to defend my presence or to explain myself. Home is where I blend in. Home is where I belong. So in the US, in the early days of the lockdown, we were advocating for people to stay home. And I was talking to people elsewhere to stay home from the comfort of my home. And that made me realize the idea of home is not always the same. There are people who despise their homes when home is not safe. There are people who associate home with being abused or violated. And I'm telling those people to stay home. But I felt like I need to repackage my messaging. People should be in a place where they feel safe. People should be in a place where they feel secure, whether that place is a home, their own, or whether that place is a friend's home or an office. People should be in that space. So when we talk about home, sometimes we impose our own understanding of home on people, and that is wrong for me. I want people to feel safe. I want people to feel secure, whether that is on a couch at their grandparents' house or whether that is in their own house where they pay their bills or live in. So I don't want to associate home or belonging to a space with the traditional or the concept that always clicks in my head. Everyone's concept might be different. Yesterday, a friend and I were driving around the city, and a mailman was on a motorbike. He looks like he had a really long day. His face was dusty and he looked so tired. And I told my friend, this guy, when he gets home, he will shower and rest some, because you can tell he is so tired. Then the two of us started talking, what kind of home would he have? Like, would he be able to sleep? Would he be able to shower? Would he be able to eat? So like home is different for everyone, and we need to be mindful of our privileges when we talk about home and impose our idea of home on others.
Fantastic, fantastic. We can never have enough reminders to do a privilege check, right? So thank you. Thank you, Maji, for that. I also realized I've been remiss in my duty. I should have announced at the start, issued a standard trigger warning. We might get into areas that might become uncomfortable for some people listening in. Please log out if anything that we talk about triggers you. And if you need help with any mental health issues, there are a bunch of resources available online. Get in touch with me potentially on Twitter. I'm happy to leave my coordinates, and I can try and direct you towards professional help. What Maji said, once again, that brilliant image of the mailman, and I feel like I can see the mailman I don't know if that's true for all of you, but I can see the mailman, I can see his dusty face, and I really want him to have a good night's sleep. I want him to have a good, refreshing shower. I want him to eat warm food or whatever he likes, and I want him to have a good night's sleep. And at the same time, how painfully true this is that not everybody associates home with the idea of safety. I realized this last year at the beginning of the lockdown here in India, when a young boy reached out to me and said, you know, I am now cooped up with my family, and they're very, very, you know, we are not they're not violent, abusive people, but they are not people that, you know, we don't see eye to eye, and it's very difficult for us to coexist in this little space for months on end. And you know, what do I do? And then, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, you have real abuse. You have you know, extremely violent households where unspeakable things are done, mostly to women, mostly to children, mostly to people with disabilities. There are any number of studies now that have proved that the toll of the pandemic, both mental health and physical health impact of the pandemic, has been most felt by these communities that are, I mean, and it's not rocket science really. It's all about power. Because we talked about children, I have to come to Irene next. Irene is the world's first 1,000 days correspondent. Irene writes about the first 1,000 days of human life as it starts from conception, or sometimes even the idea that you want to start a family. Irene and I were colleagues at the Correspondent. You know, we have a lot of spiritual connection, I think, but we are thematically constantly playing ping pong with each other, because I write about mental health, she writes about early childhood, and of course, there is a lot of there are a lot of intersectionalities there. I want to ask Irene. Irene writes a lot about Lorenzo, her little son, who's growing up, and Irene is documenting his growing up, as it were. And I want to segue, you know, straight into that. Irene, how did you experience home personally? She's also you know, homeless by choice is how she describes herself, I think. So Irene, tell us all about your encounter with the idea of home, and tell us a little bit about Lorenzo and whatever you'd like to.
Thank you so much, Tanmoy, and thank you so much, everyone else. It's been it's so important to be talking about what you're talking about, and Maji and Abhisek already like have. I'm taking notes as you talk, so this has been really wonderful. And so much of what you were saying in different ways really resonated with me. You know, Maji, you were talking about sort of the home as an elusive concept, and that's definitely been the case for me. I've lived in some 12 plus countries over this past 20 years, mainly as a journalist, but also because my husband is Argentinian, so we have a step in our, you know, a foot in Argentina and a foot in Europe. I'm originally from Italy. And in 2016, we decided to leave Argentina, where we had set up our first sort of home that I felt as a home, and we started traveling. So, you know, we became homeless by choice. We started a nomadic existence, and we lived with friends, with family around the world while pursuing different projects. And at some point, we started also doing house sitting, so looking after people's homes, people that were either traveling or maybe had a second property elsewhere. And that's where my son Lorenzo was born. We were in central Italy looking after a house in the countryside for 10 months. But basically when March 2020 came, we had just landed in Italy after 3 months of being in Argentina with family. And we had all these plans for 2020 that involved at least 5-6 months of traveling, of being on the road between conferences and research trips, etc. We no real address to call our home. And when we landed in Italy on the 1st of March of 2020, over 3 days, all the plans we had unraveled completely. And so we found ourselves with 2 more days in an Airbnb and no more address to go to afterwards. And all of a sudden we realized we didn't really have a home. We rented something in southern Italy by the beach. We were like, we need to find something nice where we can be, where we can look after our son full time while while working full time as well. And we stopped over at my parents' place for a weekend, for what was supposed to be a long weekend. And overnight, the Italian government imposed the lockdown. And so we ended up spending 3+ months in my parents' place without very much choice because, for bureaucratic reasons, we're actually registered there. Our home address is there because we need to have an address. And that stay with my parents became very problematic, really made me question what is a family? What is a home? Why do governments don't allow for more flexibility? And it really brought up a lot of questions about, if home is a place where people understand you, then why was I supposed to be with my blood family right then, where loads of difficult situations were actually coming up? And the other thing that was very hard was that my son, who was at the time 1 year old, had just turned 1. He was made to stay at home. The Italian government had a very strict lockdown policy for kids, and kids could not go out at all. So at age 1, he was stuck at home for 3 months in a flat, without looking outside, etc. So he spent like a fourth or fifth of his life inside. And when he finally could go outside because the restrictions were relaxed a little bit, he got scared of the outside world. And I think that's when we realized that our dream of being nomadic at this time didn't make any sense. And we looked for a place where we could have outside space so that if a second lockdown were to come, our son wouldn't suffer from being stuck inside, and we would also sort of be more protected ourselves, right? And so we ended up here in Greece, first with friends and kind of setting up, kind of a communal space to share those responsibilities, that weight of being in a home. And now we're in another long lockdown, schools are closed. Again, it's a very different sort of context from what Abhisek was saying. I'm talking out of the privilege of having, a roof and having a healthy child, of being able-bodied, etc. But the toll of having full-time childcare has been really hard for us parents. And I'm very lucky because my husband is the main carer of our child. It's a very statistically unlikely condition, but it's been really intense on our mental health. And sometimes there are moments where, I ask myself, if there's no one that can really care for me or care for us a little bit, nobody that we can lean on, how can we, keep this home going? And loads of parents are feeling that same stress under even more straining circumstances. And there's so much data out of the US and Italy that most of the jobs lost in 2020 are women, because that's mainly falling on them. But I think that the positive thought is that we gave some thought to the idea of home and tried to create something that could work for us. And this is the closest that we could come to: some outside space, some space for some privacy. And I feel very lucky that we have this at this point.
Thank you, Irene. I think we are bringing up, trying to bringing up a 3-year-old. And I constantly look at Irene's pieces and try to derive learnings, and I always find more questions than answers. And that's the nature of parenting, especially in the post-pandemic world, I think. You said something which is which strikes right at the heart of this idea of this discussion, which is, if there is no one we can lean on, then how do we keep this home going? And that could be the body as home. If the body can't lean on somebody, then how do we keep this body going? And all of us, I'm sure, have had that experience of deep, profound fragility, whether mentally or physically, when there's nobody that we can lean on, and then we feel like, how do we just keep going? And or otherwise, and we can just sort of superimpose that idea onto the actual house or whatever space we inhabit. And if there's nobody to keep that space going, then how do we go on? And I'm pretty sure Smriti has heard a lot of these stories. It's not something that I envy. It's something that she has to do because she's trained in that. And I'm sure, like my therapist tells me every time I tell her, I really feel bad for you. You have to listen to all these stories all the time. She says, I'm kind of like, it's important for me to be able to hear those stories and to do something with them. So I'm sure Smriti does not regret that, but nonetheless, thank you so much, first of all, Smriti, for making time for yet another heavy conversation. I'm sure this is, a lot of what your week looks like. If I might jump in and ask you to just, comment about essentially the same things. What did home mean for you? Especially because I'm mindful that for most of us, work from home was a new idea, but for you, you do a lot of tech-based work, a lot of text-based work, so you are not necessarily meeting clients face to face. How did you even, did you even manage to maintain a boundary between your personal space and your workspace when this entire thing happened? Anything else? Any other impression of this time? Over to you, Smriti.
I'll begin by saying that I literally had goosebumps when I was hearing Abhisek, and then also, Maji, and description of what Irene has experienced, and how she's bringing up her son, and then all those stories. They are. It's not like you're right. Like I do hear a lot of these stories in my everyday work, but it also reminds of how this entire concept of home is so imagined. There is no concreteness to this concept. It's not just the four walls, not just the functions of a house that, if we say I'm safe in my house, then am I really safe in my house? And all of us have our experiences shaping our narratives about this word called home. And for some of us, it is that safe haven. For other people, it's like a trap. And that's what I've heard from what Abhisek said and Maji said. And Maji, I so resonated with your experience and your physician's experience, because I was in the US for 6 years at one particular point in time in my life, and I was on an H4 visa there, so I couldn't work. And for me, work, if I can say, my work is my home, because I feel the closest to being myself, most comfortable with what I'm doing, very safe with what in that environment, even if that environment is an imagined space in my own house, my desk, my chair, and my laptop. But I feel connected. That bonding that I have with my clients, the kind of work that I do with them, that brings in so much of safety for me, and that entire movement, the physical movement from one country to another country at that point in time, left me feeling homeless. And I had, my elder daughter was about 10 months then, and I was at a loss of what do I do in that house. It didn't have a balcony. It was a one-bedroom house in the US. And I was very conscious of my nationality, of my color, and how people would approach. And I had this, even if it wasn't people who really commented on me, or maybe came up and said to me that you're different, it was something that I had it within me. Maybe it was my own perception of what they would be thinking about me. I was hesitant to go out to a Walmart and ask for something, because I felt I wouldn't be understood. My accent wouldn't be understood. And I really had withdrawn into my shell at that point in time. And so that was one, time when I felt that maybe just having a balcony in my house would have really helped. That addition to that physical space would have given me some space to just move away from that one bedroom and just look out and just look around. And I would be just shut down indoors for as long as my husband wouldn't return from work. And then he was tired, and I would tell him, can we just go out now somewhere where I'm with you and you do all the conversations with other people, because you're doing those conversations in your office and you're more, you're more familiar, you're more comfortable in the environment here. So and I think over the next couple of years, I did find myself getting a little more adjusted in the environment, feeling more at ease, but it was still never home for me. Because another thing that I remember is that I've always been a very social, very family oriented person. I have been present for my family members, and they have been present for me whenever I have needed that. And that loneliness that was there, because I was constantly worried about their health, worried about their well-being, thinking that they must be worried about me as my, about my well-being as well. And then we moved back, and that brought in some confidence back. And wherever we were, even though I was not in the same city as my parents or my family, I was feeling at home. And then, like you said, I have been working from home for the past 9 or 10 years now. And I had pretty clear boundaries then, and people would be surprised that how do you manage two little kids, how do you manage those boundaries? And I said, oh, I'm very smart. I have kept a space separate for my workspace, and I've taught my kids that this is a boundary. And if you come, if I'm on the laptop and if you see me intensely involved, you can just clap, or you can do some sort of a cue word, so I know you need me. And March 2020, everything went topsy-turvy for me, because my husband was at home, my daughters were at home, and there was a complete loss of boundaries. That personal space, that space that was mine, was no longer mine. And I would sound selfish, because that's their home too, and there's a reason why the lockdowns happened. There's a reason why people are being asked to stay indoors, but it also meant a lot of loss. For in many ways, there was loss of routines, there was loss of that personal boundaries. Everybody was telling everybody to be quiet, to talk in low volumes, because my husband's having a meeting and my daughters are having their online classes. And there was internet bandwidth became a war zone, you know so there were so many of these little things I had never imagined would disrupt that notion of home for me, and probably for, of course, my family members as well. As I noticed them struggling with these things as well. I think there were a lot of conflicts that started happening between me and my partner. They were not so, it was not so obvious that there were so many things we hated about each other, but those things suddenly started mushrooming up. So I think it's really also a space where these daily interactions, like Tanmoy, you said, it's and Maji also said, it's about a power play that's happening. I have been in the house for 10 years, looking after the house and my work. So I own that area in some ways, which was suddenly everyone was around and everyone wanted to do it their ways. And it was a lot of adjustments that had to be made. Very difficult ones. Some of them were pretty difficult ones. And my house help, for her, this lockdown meant a very difficult time, because when she would visit us, doing helping me with my course, she would talk to me about her life, she would share with me about her life. I was like her confidant, where she would share everything from her marital life to her life with her family, with extended members, money issues, everything. And there was physical abuse that was present in her family. And suddenly we lost touch, and I was constantly concerned about her, tried to reach out to her multiple times. And we realized that they were forced out to move out of their own space that they were in, because the landlord had asked them to move out because they were visiting different houses, and it was like they would probably get the virus and then infect everybody in the community. and they were forced out of that space. And then I heard a couple of months later that she was admitted in a hospital, battered, because of the domestic violence. And so there were these, so there are these so many our own narratives, our own experiences form the concept of home. I don't think there is any one definition that we can say that this is home. So, and it can change from day to day. For me, after I came back, it was a safe space. For me, I was very comfortable, and suddenly then the meanings changed.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. I don't want to belabor any of the things that you said, but I think, I think we're going to be discussing violence a whole lot during this chat, unfortunately. So once again, trigger warning number 2, if anything that we talk about upsets you, distresses you, please log off and seek help if you need help. Abhisek, I want to come to you because you do a lot of work on the idea of masculinity. And as we were prepping for this, it struck me how the idea of home is traditionally conceived as a feminine space, and the world is the masculine space, where we go out to conquer, as it were, and then we come back home and do what? We essentially replicate the same patterns of violence. Are we, in a sense, are we addicted to violence? Why do we bring the same thing inside? But no, the thing that we really want to ask you, I really want to ask you is, from the lens of your research on masculinity, have you seen the intense proximity, the forced proximity between male and female partners during this period bring an added layer of tension? Has it turned this idea of home into an aggravated sort of, somebody used the word war zone? I think Smriti said that about the fight for the internet bandwidth, which is also, I think, an icon of our times. So did the pandemic do something to that dynamic? Did the home lose some of that at least imagined femininity? Did it become hyper masculine? What happened? What do you think happened?
Right. One of the things you said was power. It's all about power. And so when the men, I personally saw in few homes that what happened, that when men came back and when they had to decide whether to call the house help or not, the men took the decisions very quickly, because it was the women who were supposed to do all the housework. Okay. Especially in our society, patriarchal, which is very patriarchal in nature, and where in most households, hopefully it is changing, but that's the thing. Most women do all the household work, and so it was easy for them to put the burden on them. The onus of not getting the kids infected was also on the women. And that is also a sort of emotional violence. And of course, there was physical violence, any kind of physical proximity where there is power, there is abuse, not only amongst couples, amongst children and parents, because that is a hostile space. Especially if you imagine people who are not accepted within their own families. If you imagine queer families, or if you imagine disabled families, if you or disabled kids or queer children, and there is there's already so much struggle going on for acceptance, and this could become a hostile space, because just by people expressing themselves, there is of course the unequal division of work, and but there is also this violence which is always under running any kind of marginalized. If you belong to any kind of marginalized group, there is always a power structure within your household, because even if it's about siblings, a person who is able-bodied, straight, heteronormative will get more preference, and that also leads to a lot of violence.
Of course.
And of course, as a feminine space, like for example, for me, kitchen was a place of solace. It turned into, but I also realized then, after a point of time, how hostile it can turn it to be, how mind numbing in a sense it can be, when you have to do it again and again. And
Yeah.
I really found, and it's not about, it's also about that often do things in our households where you are, for example, the simple things. I will tell you, if I make a rangoli, which is floor art which you do on festivities. If a man does a rangoli, there will be five men coming to you and questioning your masculinity. So such fragile things become such big things, because the idea of masculinity is actually built around a very fragile idea of, which has very concrete underlinings of power and patriarchy. So it comes,
Yeah.
no one wants to accept that there is power in patriarchy, and that's why it's always, there's always rationality, and that rationality in its most violent form was perpetuated within homes when women were asked to do work from home, as well as handle children, as well as do the household work. Can't call the help because infection. And this is the typical, this is, if anything signifies masculine privilege within patriarchy, and this idea of how patriarchy operates within homes, it is this, I think.
Mm.
So that is true, definitely true. With disabled individuals, it's especially, masculinity works in different ways, and it all often depends on how masculinity, how your body is. It's
Mm.
related to you, how your body is impacted. But I will tell you one thing. So I had a friend who is a woman. She wanted to step out of the house for a walk. She's visually impaired, and when she did, you know what the neighbors used to do? They had some problem with her. I don't know what, but they used to put pots and chairs in the in the balcony in front of them. So whenever she used to go, she used to crash into them. Can you imagine the kind of emotional harassment which, and then when she asked them why they were doing it, they questioned her morality, and they questioned her, "Ki, what kind of character you have?" No, it's that sort of uh, a patriarchal mindset which prevails amongst people, and that is the most disheartening fact. That is something we are not able to, in fact, lockdown has perpetuated. And uh, you know in fact, when the lockdown finally ended, I think a lot of women breathed a sigh of relief, because it was their individuality which was being put under question. And with men, there is nothing which can harm their individuality, because they are
Yeah.
always like men. In fact, most of the people who I found roaming around in the apartment even during the lockdown were men, because they had to pick up the groceries, and they could be the one, they were the one who could socialize with other men, who could make decisions about who they will allow inside a society. So all of these things are also perpetuate this inequity which prevails within homes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Once again, very instructive. And as you were talking about, men doing groceries and, all these other things, I was thinking about what I was doing during the pandemic, during the lockdown. The pandemic is still on. We keep talking about the pandemic in the past tense, people, but it is still happening. Um, I remember, so I have huge social anxiety. I have to take many pills every day to keep it under control. I have to do therapy twice a week. Um, and when the lockdown started, I became even more intensely homebound. I've always been a homebody, and I became even more intensely homebound. I didn't want to step out, not because of some aggravated fear of catching the virus, but because, um, everything had such an apocalyptic look. I think that, it was very unsettling for me. And I was very conscious that I'm failing in some of these male duties. I'm not going to the gate to get the milk and the veggies that people are leaving there. I'm asking my wife to go and get it. And I was thinking, what will my neighbors think? What kind of man am I? I never step out of the house. I never do any of these things. Thankfully, I have learned to make peace with a lot of these expectations that I have of myself. But so true, everything that Abhisek said hit home, I think. Um, Maji, I want to come to you and ask you about. So we have jammed a bit on the global mental health movement, which is really a neo-colonial sort of echo chamber. Because, all right, for those of you who are not in the know, a very quick crash course on what the global mental health movement is. It was conceptualized as a way to make mental health more inclusive, include more voices from everywhere, but it has predictably remained the preserve of a bunch of typically male white academics and funders in the West. So we have huge inequities as a result of that. Sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, gets almost nothing, no support for its fairly large burden of psychosis, for instance. LMICs, they house 80% of the world's population, get only 20% of the mental health resources. And I could go on, and I'm sure Maji knows the statistics even better. But I want to come to you here and talk about, something maybe a little hopeful. Did you think that was the timing of the work that you managed to do, and the forcefulness with which you were able to make that demand that you did of saying, our time has come, now you listen to us and make this truly democratic, listen to us. And you went to a place as monolithic as the Lancet and said, hey, listen to us. Was the timing just accidental, or what was happening in the world? Was that somewhere plugged into your consciousness? I'm sure it could have been. But did you feel, given that a lot was being written about how all of us are as safe as the most vulnerable among us, and these lines became staples in media reports in New York Times and all these places, did you feel a shift, and did you feel like, okay, the time has now arrived, this is our best chance of changing some of these power structures and getting our fair share?
At the time, I think the Lancet was doing what it's been doing for the past couple of years. And I don't believe they expected to be challenged, especially by a Black woman from Africa. So finding that voice was something I still cherish, like being able to call them out. But the more important part is they messed up and they were aware of it. And when I called them out, they did not have a convincing story to tell me. And then, especially in the wake of racial justice movement globally, them to ignore 50% of the world's population and still consider themselves to be global. And especially the contexts are different. And we have 85% of the world's refugee population. And in many indicators, if anyone has to identify as global, it should have been us than them. So I had to say, I used my Twitter just to voice sometimes my dissatisfaction with a lot of systems, including imperialist systems. And after tweeting about that, I was expecting a reply, but I did not expect that reply to be actually offering me to write. And it makes sense because they did not have any other convincing narrative to say. So they had to salvage the situation by telling me, hey, okay, write a perspective piece and then let's be over this. And it was Dr. Sumitra Patari and myself who actually demanded the journal to publish an editorial. And they again agreed to our request and went ahead and published it. I feel like the timing, especially like the global movement, the racial justice movement, played some part, especially in them being responsive and being willing to publish that level of criticism targeting them and their system. But thinking about global mental health or global health broadly in more broader sense, the disparities and the hypocrisy still is ongoing. We can see that in terms of the vaccine distribution now. Like I was trying to see my experience as an African working in the United States. If I stayed there for until my vaccine time rollout, like in the sequence is through, I would get the Pfizer or the Moderna which are proven to be like 94, 95% effective. And coming to Africa, for one, right now, you know, a lot of African governments are not even like doing any vaccine, and the COVAX, through which they're trying to acquire vaccine, is giving them AstraZeneca, which is it's like 62% efficacious, and it's proven to be less effective or ineffective actually against mild and moderate cases of the South African variant in a healthy and young sample. So that tells you the push for like global vaccine equity still doesn't include a lot of us in low and middle income countries. And even when we pushed, South Africa had to buy the AstraZeneca like 3 or 4 times the price an European Union country would buy it for. And thinking about Ghana recently got it, and then they started the rollout, and Africa CDC knew about the 30% or 33% lower efficacy rate, but they still endorsed it. So I am of the opinion that geography shouldn't condemn our access to efficacious vaccine, and the legacy powers are going to remain legacy powers. I'm not expecting any magic to just turn them around. If we see that countries like hoarding the vaccine, Canada has 10 times more vaccine per capita. Like they have more than the dosage they would need. And we have countries and high risk populations in low and middle income countries who would have benefited, but we are going to have a lot of unnecessary excess mortality. So in those spaces, extremely polarized and who do not look beyond their strategic interest, our presence would mean sometimes making noise, even when our voice is not targeting a specific person or a specific company. Because the whole idea was we're trying to make noise, and we were able to land on some positive ear, and we got the response we wanted. So in that space, especially, I'm always aware of my identity as a Black person and as a Black woman and as a Black African. So when I speak up, I know it can translate into so many stereotypes, but hey, my voice is out there anyway. So that is the goal.
No, more power to you. More power to you. I've been watching the advocacy that you've been doing for vaccine equity, and I mean, I think not enough people are saying these things, and we all need to say these things. I think the third leg of this discussion, as it were, was insanity. And it is insanity what is happening in the name of, I mean, in the global health scene, in global mental health, but in global health in general. And it's also, everything is just so interconnected, because if you're not able to secure yourself by way of getting this vaccine, and once again, people with disabilities, people with chronic illnesses are so much more vulnerable, and they need this vaccine. But sometimes, because of the arbitrary the flooring that has been put in place, they can't get in. They have to wait, and this puts them at disproportionately greater risk. And they are not safe even when they're indoors. They can follow all the spiel that the administration is sending their way. They can wear a mask, and they can maintain distance and wash their hands, but they are never going to be fully safe till they are given a proven efficacious vaccine. And right now, the parameters are very, very wonky, to say the least. So thank you, Maji, for bringing that up. I want to come to Irene, and Irene, I had also made notes when I spoke to you yesterday, so you're not the only one making notes. Yes, you said something very beautiful yesterday. You said that home should not be just a place where the crystal vases are safe, but where children can make a lot of mess. And that's when home will become a truly joyful space. So as we approach the end of the time allotted to us, I want to come to you, and I want to listen to you for a bit about constructing this joyful space. How do we do it? Tell us. Educate us.
Thank you, Tanmoy. This is like one of the things that actually makes me really happy. It's like talking about play and how children that represent a third of the world's population are usually, considered less because they don't vote, because we think they're adults in the making, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, when Smriti was talking about home and sort of fighting for the space, but also about her experience of living in a 1-bedroom in the US, I was thinking it's so hard when there are, with the pandemic that is still very much going on, there's been such a power struggle in a way inside our homes between the adults who have to stay productive, etc. We're still doing our jobs, etc. And the kids that have very different developmental needs, right? Play is considered one of the most important ways for children to actually develop all sorts of things, from understanding, how to relate to others, to actually understanding space and their physical ability to stand or jump or whatever. And imagine if you're a child who's just growing up and all of a sudden you're stuck at home. Tanmoy, you said the pandemic is still going on. In the Philippines, children have not been able to leave the home for a year now. And in the UK, there's very strict regulations about kids. They're just now are being, relaxed a little bit. Here in Greece, schools are closed and so are playgrounds. What are you supposed to do if you live in a 1-bedroom apartment, with your kid? So this is the thing. I think that, as usual, inequality plays a huge role. The more money you have, the more space you have, probably the fewer conflicts you have at home, the fewer struggles for space. But even if we don't have very fancy homes, a lot of the thinking that we do can shift. And in that way, we can shift our conflicts at home. So I always say, try to imagine to, stand, like kneel down, be on your knees and imagine the perspective of the home from the sort of 95 centimeter. That's what a child, usually 3-year-old child is usually, and try to imagine what the home looks like from that perspective, and try to imagine all the spaces that you've already kind of limited, right? So imagine, okay, so these are the crystal glasses for your wine. If you're in Italy, you definitely have those glasses, or, this is, the kitchen stuff that they can't touch. Then there's like the work table, there's this, that. How many boundaries, what do we actually leave out for our kids? And how many rules do we put out? Like the room, we spend so much time cleaning, it's a problem, right? Like, we don't have time. We want to have a clean environment. We want to have an organized thing to be more efficient, to be more productive, etc. So why, it's understandable that we want our kids to follow rules, but we also need to leave them space to do what they need to do. So, if you can try and be a little bit more playful as an adult and think that any table can become a fort if you put, for example, a blanket over it. And so while you're typing away, your kid can hide and have their own adventures out there. Sofas don't need to be pristine. Like, you can put the cushions on the floor and they're going to be okay. You're going to be able to wash them or do something about it. Did you get something through the mail in a cardboard box? That's a great little car. You can even draw like wheels on it and like maybe push your kid around. There's loads of little things that we can think about and follow the cue of what our kids are telling us. Because if they're having tantrums, if they're playing, if they're clingier, if they're having a hard time, it's because they're also stressed. They absorb a lot of the stress that we caregivers have. And they've been stuck at home with us, without their peers, without being able to get dirty to see the outside world. And we know so much about how much kids also need natural environment. So if you're stuck at home, if that's your main space, if you don't have an outside space, maybe there are rocks that you can build something natural in. But what I'm trying to say is that the home belongs to several of us. Sometimes when there are kids around, we tend to think that they don't need the same kind of space that we do, but they also do. And so if we can think about the home as sharing equally, you know, that like if we can share the power more equally, then I think we can also kind of have a little bit less conflict and more fun and joy.
Thank you. I think you can say all of that again and we will have like broad smiles on our faces, because it's the most unexpectedly joyous thing to hear, I think, to talk about the 95 centimeter perspective. It is absolutely an Irene trademarked idea. And I haven't tried doing it, but tonight I will make it a point to do it. The 95 centimeter perspective, it's a really, it's a hauntingly good idea, isn't it? It's such an amazing idea. And suddenly you see the whole cityscape, the entire landscape of the home transform before your eyes. It's magical. These are the things that we should be taught in school. What does the world look like when you are in a wheelchair? What does the world look like when you are 95 centimeters high? Instead of whatever it is that we are taught, I think. And well, we can always wish. Smriti, can't let you go before having you share some wisdom. I'm sure you've got all sorts of questions and poses from your clients, but without giving away anything confidential, what were some of the top 2 or 3 things that you ended up telling them about how to cope with this? Because we all have to cope. We can crib and complain till the cows come home, but well, till the cows come home. But we have to cope. What did you tell, asking for a friend, what did you tell your clients?
Irene, thanks for sharing those wonderful tips. And I think picking up from what Abhisek said, and then Maji said, and then Irene also said, the concept of home, safety, comfort, familiarity, coping, because these things seem to be missing, specifically during these particular times. I think it's helpful to, examine one's perspective as to how we are visualizing that space. Like how Irene said that, home is a shared space, and it's not just the space for adults, or like Abhishek said, that it's not just the space for somebody who's more powerful. There are it's a space where personalities are blending, where 2 people bringing in, or multiple people bringing in, their experiences are blending. So helping each other's intentions sometimes really helps in creating a safe space for oneself and for our family members as well, if we are with them. And finding things for oneself that can, being more mindful, being more in the present, definitely has been something that's very helpful, because once the worry loop starts and you start going down the rabbit hole, it's very hard to pull yourself out. So identifying what is it that is, sometimes, and it's sometimes hard to stop the worry loop. I understand. I have been there, right? Couple of months back, my father passed away on the 4th of Jan, and I'm still struggling with it. My family was scattered. My husband was in Pune with kids. I was here with my mom in Delhi. We were trying to figure out where our home would be, because we all wanted to be together. And I think what helped us cope during these times was to not fight the strong current that we were in, but to just flow with it, just to do things that helped us hang in there. Because specifically these times of the pandemic, and you're right, it's still on, it's not ended. And the new normal is still new, and it's getting, I think, even more novel day by day for a lot of us, with different demands coming on us. It's very helpful to stay in the moment, try and have activities that you enjoy, or that brings you calm or peace, regardless of what's happening around you. Things that are helpful and are energy giving for you, wherever you are, in whichever. For example, playing with my daughters. And Irene, if it wasn't for my 10-month-old, I would have actually gone nuts, if I can say that, in that time. So and that's energy giving for me. So I've identified that whichever space I am in, whatever is energy giving for me, I'll try and focus on that. And my insights of what will be helpful comes either from my own experience or the client stories that I hear. And this is what clients have also shared with me. I usually do not go by very therapeutic, evidence-based suggestions, because when it comes to the moment, some of them don't seem to work. And we really need to identify what has helped us in similar moments in the past. This is a difficult experience, but this is not the only difficult experience many of us would be facing right now. We've had some difficult experience in the past as well. So what has helped me back then could also be brought back in today. Is it talking to someone, one particular friend that we may have, or it could be a hobby, it could be I wouldn't say self-care, because I know self-care doesn't really work after a couple of days or weeks. I tried myself. I'll do Zumba for as soon as the pandemic started. I had my entire routine ready. I didn't stick to it for more than a week. So I think also a lot of acceptance around that this is it right now, and a lot of people are in the same boat, and fighting it won't help, and resisting it won't help, but going with the flow. And just if you feel it's rest, if you feel it's taking a half day, if you feel it's taking a complete day off, whatever works for you, just doing that really helps. Asking yourself, what do I need in this moment, whether it's physical, whether it's talking to someone, leaning on, calling up someone, talking to a professional. Talking to a professional doesn't need one to be unwell all the time. It could be just to vent out, to share. That's what a lot of my clients have been doing. On Visa, we've seen a 70% increase in demands for people to just be able to text, which was amazing, because I never thought that just texting, not seeing the person, would also be would soon become a popular mode. But people have utilized that as well.
Yeah, and how, thank you, Smriti, and how infinitely gratifying it is that some of us can afford to take half days off, unlike, all of those people who were just trying to get home and died. Sorry, I don't want to end on a heavy note. I made a mental note to not end on a sad note. So I will latch on to one word that Smriti used, which was acceptance. And I will circle back to something that was said early on. I think Maji said this: home is where they understand you. And I think if we can tack on home is where they also accept you, because sometimes understanding is not enough. Sometimes we need to be accepted. Even if you don't understand me, accept me. I think to me, acceptance is the greater virtue. I want to also be explicit in thanking the Indian Institute for Human Settlements for an institute that an organization that specializes in studying human settlements to create the space for us. I think it wouldn't have been possible but for an organization like that to create the space for us, because this conversation hasn't really had a center of gravity. We have gone in all sorts of directions, and we've still, I think, managed to make very good use of the past 70 odd minutes. So I will go back to the organizers, Rekha or whoever from City Scripts is here. Somebody is here. If there are any questions, we can take them now. Otherwise, I'm happy to chat with this fabulous panel for another 10 minutes.
No, we don't seem to have any questions. I think we did have one, and Maji was very kind enough to just type out the answer for us. Okay. So I think, I think chat's always wonderful. I think we really enjoyed listening to you. We also got thoroughly engrossed just listening to you, and we forgot our hosting duties slightly while we were at it also. So
that's the highest compliment, and people forget that this is still a show that is being put on in some senses, and compliments to everybody, to all the panelists and everyone still hanging around. There was one question early on that I had seen. I think somebody had asked a very general question about how do you know that you have a mental health issue, and I think I can talk to you for an entire day about it. Maji can talk about it. Smriti can talk about it. But I think, what Smriti said in the end is particularly relevant, that we don't really need to wait for a diagnosis or for things to get really bad. Just listen to yourself. If anything feels, I'm just going to use very basic language and say, if anything feels a bit off, and if it feels off for an unmanageable period of time, it's a good idea to seek help. Timehin had a question. I think Maji has already responded to that. I want to ask one question. I have to ask this question. I have made a note somewhere. Where is this? Yes, Irene. Irene, you talked about the fact that for a lot of children, they spend a good fourth or fifth of their lives, sometimes even more. My son was born and, the pandemic started, and, there are a lot of theories floating around that this could be doing irreversible damage in a sense to children. And there are all these doomsday theories. 20 years later, we will find out what this terrible time has done to our children. Do you believe in that, or do you think, all is not lost?
Well, I've been doing so many interviews to psychologists with psychologists around the world. And there are two main beliefs that I keep coming back to. One is that even though the first 1,000 days and in general, the first 5 years of life are incredibly important and formative, nothing represents a direct death sentence. A trauma doesn't have to mark you for the rest of your life. And, will this difficult period mark a child? That looks very different if your parents lost a job, your caregiver got sick, maybe you lost a caregiver. It really depends on what the real circumstances of how the COVID really affected you. And in the end, psychologists keep coming back to the idea that we don't really know what the real effects are, but that one of the hardest things that they're really finding difficult to grapple with and they're really worried about is that, especially for children that are sort of in the 2 to 4 kind of age group, that's usually when they start creating bonds beyond the family. And that's when they usually learn how to socialize, especially with their peers. And in so many countries, schools have been closed. The preschool nurseries have been closed. It's not possible to see people beyond the immediate nuclear family, whatever that may be. And so there is definitely something that is being lost there in the process. And so a lot of these child experts are really putting the focus on, let's not just think that this is a period when they couldn't get access to content, to information. Let's not go back to school just to cram, on information, but let's go back to spaces where kids can really interact and play. Again, I'm bringing play up again, because in so many countries, playgrounds have been closed. Where are kids supposed to just have fun and meet other kids? So I think that's the thing. There's nothing that can mark forever. There are so many things that can really help, as in general with our mental health also for adults, but for kids, it's even more obvious, like play, socializing for many of them are the greatest ways to actually cope with trauma or grief.
Right. Maji, well, as we head deeper and deeper into this abyss and we don't know when this will end, where are you getting your hope and your sort of sustenance from?
It's so coincidental that you asked me this question, because right before this panel, I was with a friend and he asked me the same question. My hope mostly comes from the little things in life, whether that is meeting a friend or being able to grab coffee with a stranger and a good conversation. It comes from that. But I also have moments where I draw hope and inspiration from people who are doing their job right. like seeing anything that works, anything that functions, and people who care, people who love what they do, people who love others. And I love people for the way they love others. So I draw my hope from the little things in life that I think summarize it.
That isn't little at all. People who are doing their jobs right, people who are functioning, people who are loving, that's not little at all. You've asked for the whole world, Maji, but thank you. May you receive those bounties. Abhisek, what's keeping you hopeful? Or have I asked the wrong question? Because
No,
I don't know what makes me
I
hopeful.
always try to be hopeful. I find my hopefulness in poetry, in the hope that there are good people out there, in the hope that you live another day, you plan for another day, you make plans, even if they are distant. You hope that your body doesn't fall apart. You hope that tomorrow you will be better than what you are today. And I think a lot of hopefulness comes from your your ability to dream. And I dream a lot, so I keep that uh, completely open, and that keeps me hopeful.
That's incredible. That's incredible. We don't have time. Otherwise, I would have asked you to read some of your poetry. But people, you must find Abhisek on YouTube. He has some amazing spoken word performances. Check them out. Smriti, first of all, sorry for your loss, and thank you for opening up and sharing your grief with us. There isn't much that we can do but to say that we see you and we hear you, and we're really sorry for your loss. Have you managed to find hope? What is keeping you going now?
I think gratitude. um, there's been a lot of loss, not just for me alone. I think in the past entire year, I mean, and anyways, people experience some sort of loss across the globe every day. So knowing that suffering is common to humanity, and uh, every day I wake up, that itself is something that I feel gratitude for, that I am there. And when I am there, there are some things I can do which can, uh, you know, uh, which mean a lot to me, which bring me energy, and which probably can help another person as well. So I'm very grateful for just being, and for the people that I still have in my life. I've lost someone, but I still have some others who bring smile to my face. And when a client says that they have been helped, there's somebody who said yesterday that they felt like I was their life jacket.
Mm.
And I think I want to be that life jacket for many more people if it's possible. And I think that brings me hope. When other people feel hopeful, when I see my mom right now getting up each day trying to be normal for me because she doesn't want me to see her pain, that is something that helps me with hope.
Thank you. Thank you. I will just say a few words about what makes me hopeful. I think I'm feeling incredibly pressured right now to say something upbeat. But, Irene and I and a couple of our former colleagues and great friends were also listening into this conversation. We lost our jobs suddenly in December. And it was for most of us, sort of dream jobs. And it came out of nowhere, and it was the last thing that one needed during this really bizarre time. And I got sucked into building this new platform almost instinctively, because I had this just the most incredible outpouring of sort of community grief and community support and community love. People didn't want to lose. They said they didn't want to lose my work. They wanted me to keep going. And I thought, who's going to be interested in the politics, economics, and culture of mental health beyond people like Maji and people on this panel? But 2 months into doing this, and over 1,000 people from around the world, and I get notes from people saying, the most incredible things, which, because I'm not a professional, I don't expect to hear. I still don't expect anybody to tell me that anything that I wrote or anything that I said somewhere actually helped somebody, let alone save someone's life. And yet these messages keep coming, and they just tell me that maybe things are not so bad after all, or maybe things were always very bad and this is how we always survived. I don't know. But this is what we have. This is the hand that we've been dealt, and we'll see. We'll see. Thank you so much. This has been the pleasure of 2021 so far for me. Absolute delight. All of you have been so amazing, and thank you for the gift of your time, more than anything else, from Greece and Ethiopia and India and all over. I don't know, all of you who listened, although we have I think dwindled to about far fewer people now. But thank you for making this, which could have been a really melodramatic session, very enjoyable, very instructive, and at the same time, for just, I'm loath to use the word inspire, but really, there's no harm in using it if you mean it and if you use it the right way. So you've been so inspiring. I have made copious notes. I'll be doing a thread because that's what I do. Follow all of these incredible people, and thank you once again to IIHS, to Rekha. And there are compliments coming in the chat. Wonderful discussion, and it did have a center, indeed, says my namesake Tanmoy Bhattacharya. Thank you, Tanmoy. The Tanmoys are amazing. So thank you, Rekha. Please take over, and if you want to finish it in your style, please. I'm done. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, no, really, I think this has been, it's been really incredible for all of us who've been listening. And thank you, Tanmoy, one, agreeing to do this, and also just putting this really wonderful panel together for us to, you guys have been warm and open, and you've shared your stories and your struggles with us. And I think we take away a wonderful sense of community at the end of the day. And I think it's quite a lovely note. I know that, it's not, the conversation hasn't particularly been light and breezy throughout, but I think the sense is that, we know that there are other people out there who feel the same way as we do and have similar struggles, and we know where to reach out. And I think that's a wonderful thing to create for people. So thank you for everybody who's joined us. Thank you for taking your time out. And yes, we hope to interact and meet with you soon. And maybe we'll be able to do it in person soon enough, and we don't have to wait for too long. Thank you. I hope you guys all have a good night, good evening, the rest of the day from wherever you're joining us. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.